All right, hello, good evening, and welcome to another LAMFcast presentation, a very special presentation by the Lakes Area Music Festival hosted by yours truly. Whether you're here with me live or taking a look at this presentation at a later date, it's an honor to have you along with me here. Special shout out to Scott and Taylor from the Lakes Area Music Festival leadership team for facilitating these presentations, and thanks again to you for your continued support. All Lakes Area Music Festival activities, including this one, are made possible by the voters of Minnesota through grants from the Five Wings Arts Council and Minnesota State Arts Board through a legislative appropriation from the Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Garrett McQueen. I'm a bassoonist by training. I spent about a decade making a living on stage, and since about 2016, I've focused my energy on arts activism and advocacies, particularly for new music. I've done this by way of public and commercial radio, through digital and broadcast media, podcasting, institutional collaborations, and through very special presentations, just like this one. As a Southerner, I have to say I'm especially excited to talk with you about this upcoming concert, Rain and Red Clay. This show will feature music that celebrates the Mississippi Delta, as well as two works from the European canon. Please take note of the location. This show on August 10th is happening at the Tornstrom Auditorium in Brainerd. You can reserve your tickets for this show by naming your price online. You can reserve those tickets by visiting lakesareamusic.org for more information. As always, I like to begin these presentations with a land acknowledgement and by offering a little room for indigenous art and perspective into the space as we continue to explore what's beyond just the acknowledgement. I'm calling in today from my home, which sits on the ancestral and contemporary lands of the Anishinaabe and Wapakudi Sioux. I honor this as their land and will continue to do everything I can to inspire conversation of indigenous equity, indigenous repatriation, and ultimately indigenous liberation. And I hope that you can think about ways that you'll do the same in your own life and in your own work. I've included on the screen here a photo from the C.H. Nash Museum at Chucalissa. It's known affectionately down where I'm from simply as Chucalissa. It's a replica of a village from the Chickasaw and Choctaw regions, which make up what's now known as parts of West Tennessee and Mississippi. And that area of Mississippi is actually a part of the country that you and I will be visiting here soon, at least musically speaking. Well, Chucalissa holds a really special place in my heart because it was one of those places where school field trips went all the time when I was coming up down in Memphis. I've been there more times than I can count, and I hope that as you continue to think about what's beyond just the land acknowledgement, I hope that if you're ever in the area, you'll pay Chucalissa a visit if you're ever down in that Mississippi Delta region. As you may have noticed, if you visited Lakes Area Music Festival, the website, the overall theme for this season is Worlds Connect. This idea that music and conversation can bridge gaps between cultures and between people for the sake of a brighter future, brighter collaboration and peace among all people. So with that in mind, and in a continued effort to do more than just acknowledge indigenous people and cultures, I thought I'd share some indigenous musicking with you this evening. A really excellent display here of worlds connecting that you may not always expect or think about. The musician pictured on the screen is Christian Parrish Takes the Gun. He's known professionally as Superman, and he does an incredible job of pushing forward indigenous thought and indigenous perspectives through the art of hip hop. We're going to honor the indigenous people of the lands of Minnesota, as it were, Mississippi, and even Montana, where Superman is from, by listening to about 2 minutes of a freestyle as produced by Superman. See what you think of this.
Let's go with it. Yeah, yeah, we make it work, son. Every day is indigenous. People say we stay resilient, yeah, until we get that land back, land back, land back. Every day is indigenous. People say we stay resilient, yeah, until we get that land back, land back. Every day is indigenous. People say we stay resilient, yeah, until we get that land back, land back. Attention everybody, this land was stolen. That's why I jump on this mic like, let's go then. I'm golden, and your flow is trashy. To the man who stole my antidepressants, I hope you're happy. So come and get your love like Redbone. I'm lit when I spit, you better smudge your headphones. They wantin' my balls, like when they stuck in the dead zone. But this ain't death, I'm reppin' it nice. Call me the judge, cause you get sentenced to life. Pro agency, you messin' with a res vet. Like the game of bowling, cause we knocking down rednecks. Nah, I'm making fun, maybe them racist ones. Come on, put away them guns and stop the hating, son. I ain't tryna be that hostile who shot ya. I got no beef, man. Impossible Whopper, never took a shot at the vodka. We rockin' it proper, come on. Every day is indigenous. People say we stay resilient, yeah, until we get that land back, land back. Every day is indigenous. People say we stay resilient, yeah, until we get that land back, land back. I think I'm done, Rob.
Really fun example there of worlds connect as realized by Superman. So again, let's continue to remember that indigenous lands, indigenous culture, and indigenous musicking are not only ancestral but contemporary. So shout out to Superman and all of the indigenous people whose lands we continue to honor in our various celebrations and practices. So the fusion and respect for black music that you heard in that performance actually plays a significant role in this upcoming concert as well. On the program for this August 10th show is the clarinet quintet by Afro-English composer Samuel Coleridge-Taylor. He spent many years of his life working for civil rights for Afro-Americans on this side of the pond, and his story is a really beautiful example of worlds connecting in that way. Also on the program is an incredibly genius work for wind quintet by Valerie Coleman called Red Clay and Mississippi Delta. I'll tell you more about that red clay in particular a little later this hour. And of course, both of those works will be accompanied by a well-known and well-loved classic, the Violin Sonata No. 1 by the one and only Johannes Brahms. It's a very diverse program and one that I'm sure that you will enjoy thoroughly. So let's start here by refreshing ourselves just a bit on the story of Johannes Brahms. On the screen here, you'll see an image that I found online that I think is really fun. It's a cartoon that depicts a 19th century music critic named Edward Hanslick, and he's offering alms, incense, and special recognition to Johannes Brahms. While there are names in Western classical music that are probably a little more ubiquitous than Brahms, maybe names like Mozart and Beethoven, Brahms is definitely venerated far more than the vast majority of composers whose music is still performed today, at least from that neck of the woods and from that aesthetic. Alongside Beethoven and Bach, Brahms is the third character in the famous three B's that you'll sometimes hear in Western classical music. Brahms lived from 1833 to 1897, and he wrote 4 symphonies that still make up part of the backbone of all orchestral music, certainly here in the United States. Now, I'm someone who's always thinking about the expansion of orchestral music and Western classical music. If you've watched many of these presentations, you may have heard me use words like decolonization when it comes to some of the traditions surrounding classical music. Now, while I do believe that Brahms's music can afford to take a bit of a back seat as we all continue to explore that conversation of expanding the repertoire, even I can't deny the beauty and the impact of the music of Johannes Brahms. So, to that, I've selected two short excerpts, one full work and one excerpt from the catalog of Brahms, just to reiterate that point of how ubiquitous his music has become and how it spread beyond all sorts of sensibilities in Western classical music. These two pieces have something in common. They both showcase how Brahms has connectivity not only to the past but also to the future. Again, this idea of worlds connect. One of his most famous works is a set of variations on a tune attributed to Franz Joseph Haydn. I'm not sure if people are still calling it the Haydn variations because recent research has proved other things, but it's without a doubt one of Western classical music's finest compositions. So we're going to listen to the main theme of that work performed here on solo piano by David Escher. David played it so beautifully there. He makes it look so easy, almost like any of us could walk up to the piano and play that beautiful piece of music. Certainly one made famous by Brahms and a really excellent example of just how tender his approach was in many cases to composition. But of course, Brahms didn't only write really slow and calming music. Another one of his chamber works was famously arranged for orchestra by Arnold Schoenberg, another personal favorite of mine, his piano quartet in G minor. Not only do I think this work showcases the diversity of Brahms's output, again, something different from the slow and serene, maybe fluffy is a word that you could use. This piece also highlights how Brahms's music leans forward in a way. His Haydn variations is an example of looking back or leaning back, with this arrangement of his piano quartet in G minor as an example of how his music reached into the future, even into today. So this excerpt features the Young Artists Orchestra of Las Vegas, just a bit of the finale from the orchestral arrangement of Brahms's piano quartet in G minor. Well, a slightly different flavor of Brahms for you there. So we have these two pictures of Brahms, the composer who always looked back at his predecessors and the composer whose music reached into the future. I think his first violin sonata, which will be featured on this upcoming concert, is a great example of those two ideas coming together. It's nicknamed the Regen Sonate or the Rain Sonata because it draws on a couple of his previously written songs that referenced rain, again looking back. But even outside of the music theory behind that subtitle, I think you can imagine rain falling as you listen to the music itself, especially with that moving piano line. Droplets everywhere is what comes to mind for me. We'll listen to a couple of minutes of the third movement of this sonata, just to give you a taste and to look back and to look at the score, just so that you can get an idea of how Brahms was one again who connected worlds in his own way, and how this piece of music brings together his many moods and flavors as a composer, the composer who looked back and the composer who looked forward. The musicians you'll hear featured in this recording are Pinchas Zuckerman and Daniel Barenboim. So again, this subtitle of Rain Sonata isn't necessarily programmatic. The themes that you were hearing in the violin there come from previously written works that reference rain. But even programmatically, I think that you can take a listen to that and really imagine, again, those droplets as we hear just the tender way in which Brahms approached this piece of music. It's going to be performed really beautifully on the August 10th concert, and I can't wait for y'all to check it out in person. And a really incredible piece of music. So it's important to note that Brahms's fame isn't just for his musical compositions like the ones that I've shared with you. If you're familiar with the story of the Schumanns, for example, Clara Schumann and her husband Robert, you might remember that Johannes Brahms sort of swooped in when the chance for him to woo Clara was just right. Definitely one of Western classical music's more salacious stories, maybe. Speaking of Brahms's music having that forward-leaning impact as well, you may also be familiar with Frank Sinatra's Taylor's rendition of Brahms's Lullaby, as well as Sinatra's Take My Love, which samples some of the music of Brahms. Well, in addition to those impacts and the many others that I can name, you have the impact of Brahms on the next composer featured on this upcoming program. Samuel Coleridge-Taylor was known for a long time as the Black Mauler, actually. I'd advise not making those sorts of comparisons these days, but I bring it up just to say that while Brahms isn't always directly attributed to influencing Samuel Coleridge-Taylor, there's no denying the impact when you listen to some of his music. Brahms was a very influential composer across Europe, and with the influence came even more music, namely music by Mr. Samuel Coleridge-Taylor. Both Brahms and Coleridge-Taylor share a love for the clarinet as well, so you can add that to the list of commonalities between the two composers. So on the screen here, you'll see a photo of Samuel Coleridge-Taylor with his wife Jessie and their two children, Hiawatha and Gwendolyn. Hiawatha was also the name of the piece of music that put Samuel Coleridge-Taylor on the map, so to speak. So there's really some significance behind that name, Hiawatha, if you take a close look at the life and times of Samuel Coleridge-Taylor. I also included there the signature, not of Samuel Coleridge-Taylor, but of an English poet named Samuel Taylor Coleridge. It can be a little confusing, but that poet was actually the inspiration for his name. Samuel Coleridge-Taylor's mother named him after that poet by just switching those last two names. So, needless to say, his integration, for a lack of a better word, into English society was really strong, but he was very much aware of the black experience in other parts of the world as well, namely here in the United States. Not only did he travel to the United States to help fight for freedom and engage some of these conversations, Samuel Coleridge-Taylor wrote music that's directly drawn from America's most classical and foundational music, the Negro spiritual. We'll engage that concept of worlds connect here by listening to an example of that music. The Connie Masons, another Afro-English musical consortium, are featured here in a performance of an arrangement of a spiritual called Deep River, as written by Samuel Coleridge-Taylor. See what you think. It's a really beautiful concept if you think about it. You had this black man from England who musically honored the lives and the struggle of black folks here in the United States. And writing that music paved the way for even more black folk from England to do just the same thing as you saw from the Kane Masons there. Just so beautiful and so impactful. I love thinking about that. So while Samuel Coleridge Taylor was deeply influenced by the Afro American experience, he still had a special touch for the more European tradition as well. A couple of years back, the Licks Area Music Festival actually featured another one of his works, Samuel Coleridge Taylor's Nonet. So here's a taste of that work just to show once again that, like Brahms, Samuel Coleridge Taylor could dig into different worlds with completely different aesthetics, even aesthetics that folks he grew up around over in England considered traditional. If you're not familiar with that work, I would really encourage you to go check that out. It's historic for many reasons. I actually had the opportunity to perform that myself a couple months ago, so it's definitely a work that's getting more and more attention. So, shout out to the Lakes Area Music Festival musicians who offered that performance. Special shout out to Titus there on Principal Oboe. So again, like the Brahms Rain Sonata, Samuel Coleridge Taylor's Clarinet Quintet, which will be featured on the August 10th program, fuses those ideas together. Worlds connect, as is the recurring theme. The opening of this clarinet quintet, to my ear, is filled with that spirit of the spiritual, which Samuel Coleridge Taylor liked to dip into. Really tender music that's coupled really brilliantly with the technique and style of Western European chamber music. So here's a little taste of that work, the Clarinet Quintet, Opus 10, to be featured on the August 10th Lakes Area Music Festival concert. This performance excerpt from WQXR features the one and only Anthony McGill playing clarinet alongside the Catalyst Quartet. Just a couple minutes of the opening of this work here. There's so much in that music. You can really hear Samuel Coleridge-Taylor's genius and his ability to harness that string aesthetic, meaning the clarinet in a really incredible way. I think you can even go as far as to say you can hear some of that Brahms influence there, the fluffiness and the softness of the music. But you also hear in that music, certainly in that opening, that spiritual aspect, just the flavor and tenderness of something more. So it's such a great example of the clarinet quintet by Samuel Coleridge-Taylor, of the way that he was able to connect worlds and to really utilize all of his skills and experiences into one really important piece of music. So I hope you'll also enjoy that as it's performed on the August 10th concert. Before we move on to the final work and final composer featured on this program, I just wanted to highlight a couple more things about Samuel Coleridge-Taylor that make him a really important composer and general historic figure around the world, a global figure. He was one of the founding fathers, in a way, if you will, of Pan-African thought. He attended the very first Pan-African conference, which helped lay the groundwork for a more global black identity that many people celebrate today, certainly myself. If you ever see me wearing dashiki or African beads like these, or talking about Kwanzaa, actually, which I will in a second, you can think of Samuel Coleridge-Taylor as playing a part in that, really taking that idea of blackness and making it a little less parochial, more global, and something to celebrate as a global people. His interactions with black Americans specifically were very, very strong, especially when he traveled here to the United States. And that resulted in the Coleridge-Taylor Society of Washington, D.C. There's a photo of them down there at the bottom of the screen. And of course, Samuel Coleridge-Taylor, on his famous trip to the United States, was invited to the White House back in 1903, I believe the year was, by Theodore Roosevelt. There had been many black workers at the White House previously, some voluntary, some involuntarily, but not many black guests to the White House. So Samuel Coleridge-Taylor made a bit of history in that way as well. So as you engage the music of Samuel Coleridge-Taylor and continue to learn a little bit more about him and his legacy, keep in mind that he had impact that even went beyond music. If it weren't for much of his work, many of the conversations that we have today around race and about identity wouldn't be possible. So rest in power to Samuel Coleridge-Taylor. So, as that American and even global black identity continued to grow and evolve, as codified in part by Samuel Coleridge-Taylor, you eventually had Afro-American composers like Valerie Coleman come onto the scene. She's the final composer you'll hear from on the August 10th concert. Valerie is a highly celebrated composer in her own right, but I think it's safe to say that she's even more famous for being a founding member of an ensemble known as Imani Winds, one of my personal favorite music ensembles. They're a group that, like Samuel Coleridge-Taylor, celebrate blackness from a global perspective. A lot of the music that Imani Winds has recorded over the years actually speaks to Afro-Latin ideas and aesthetics. Just a personal note, personal story. When I was 12 years old and bringing home a bassoon for the very first time, I really didn't know what it was or what I was doing. So I typed bassoon into Napster, if y'all remember Napster, and one of the first bassoon examples I heard was actually by way of an Imani Winds performance. I think the very first tune I heard on bassoon by searching on Napster was a Vivaldi bassoon concerto, but in close second was Imani Winds' take on the very famous Libertango. This recording that I'm about to share with you, an excerpt from it anyway, was literally at the very beginning of my musical journey. So in honor of Valerie Coleman and the impact she's had on countless musicians, we'll listen to just a couple minutes of Libertango as performed by Imani Winds. And that's all we'll listen to for today, but it brings back so many memories. Imagine that performance being at the very beginning of your musical journey. That was definitely the case for me, and it's why I venerate and honor Valerie Coleman in the way that I do, namely for her work in forming Imani Winds. I mentioned Kwanzaa a little earlier, so not only has Valerie Coleman played with Imani Winds, the group looks a little different now, but not only was she a founding member, she wrote a lot of music for the group. One of the Valerie Coleman compositions that's been made famous by Imani Winds is called Umoja. It's a work named after the very first day of Kwanzaa, Umoja, or Unity in English. And it offers just a really affirming example of Black culture and Black history meeting American chamber music. So here's a little bit of Umoja by Valerie Coleman as performed here by Imani Winds. So beautiful. Umoja by Valerie Coleman. So this upcoming holiday season, when you get to the 26th of December and you don't necessarily want to play any more Christmas time music, check out Umoja by Valerie Coleman and celebrate the first day of Kwanzaa along with the rest of us. So the work by Valerie Coleman that's featured on the August 10th program is also very Black in nature, or maybe I should say red in a way. It's called Red Clay and Mississippi Delta. Valerie actually wrote some really nice program notes for it that I'll read for you. Who better to hear about this piece of music than the woman herself? So she wrote on this piece, Red Clay is a short work that combines the traditional idea of musical scherzo with living in the South. It references the background of my mother's side of the family that hails from the Mississippi Delta region. From the juke joints and casino boats that line the Mississippi River to the skin tone of kinfolk in the area, a dark skin that looks like it came directly from the red clay. The solo lines are instilled with personality, meant to capture the listener's attention as they wail with bluesy riffs that are accompanied by the rest of the ensemble. The result is a virtuosic chamber work that merges classical technique and orchestration with the blues dialect and charm of the South. Words there by Valerie Coleman. A story that I always like to tell in conjunction with this piece of music is that red clay is actually still a delicacy in some parts of Mississippi, if you can believe it. When I was coming up, it wasn't uncommon at all to hear about old school medicinal practices, particularly for women who were pregnant, to eat the red clay. There's a photo of some of that red clay on a plate there on your screen. But of course, the South isn't all about just eating dirt. The food is quite unique and quite delicious, as my waistline proves. And the black culture down there has a depth that this piece of music highlights in a really, really beautiful way. I've selected a short excerpt from Valerie Coleman's Red Clay and Mississippi Delta to give you a taste of just how delicious this piece of music is. That ending is especially sweet. It makes me think about, washing down a plate full of sweet potatoes and greens and fried chicken and meatloaf and macaroni with some sweet tea or maybe even a nice mint julep or something if you're of the drinking sort. But it's a really great example of the way Valerie Coleman is pushing chamber music, specifically music for wind quintet, and further into the future, and really highlighting the beauty that you can only find uniquely here in America and in the American South. So it's going to be a really, really, really incredible program of music that celebrates more of the European tradition, that celebrates the American tradition, and that piece of music by Samuel Coleridge-Taylor that sort of bridges the two ideas together. So that's a bit about the composers and the musics that you'll hear on this August 10th concert. The personnel for the show, pictured here on the screen, is really incredible and world class. So you're sure to hear incredible renditions of the music that I've shared with you today and that's on this concert. Shout out to my friends Ebony and Adedeji, who will be playing. They're pictured there. And shout out to all of y'all, as we say down south, for going to the website, naming your price, and reserving your tickets for the August 10th concert today. Thanks so much again for joining me this evening. I'll see y'all soon.